Thank you, Alicia, for that kind introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening as I give you a few thoughts about publishing in small and the editorial process, and also a little bit about how an editor and how the referees think and how you can adapt your publishing habits so that you can improve the success of your acceptance rates in small. But what I will be talking about is, of course, not only specific to small, but also to any other journals and any other nanotechnology journals. So hopefully after today's presentation, you will have a better idea of a few hints that you can take home with you and use them in when you prepare your future manuscripts before submitting them to a journal. So just to give you an overview of my presentation today, firstly I'll give you a very brief introduction to Wiley as well as to small and its sister journals, but then I'll be spending most of my time talking about hints for your strategy, how you can go about improving your paper and thinking about certain areas of your paper where the editors and the referees pay a bit more attention when they're evaluating your manuscript. So I will talk a little bit about the role of scientific journals, but also give you some hints about choosing the right journal, give you an overview of the review process at Wiley, but also for which will be the case for most journals, some ethical considerations when submitting your paper, and of course, during all this, I will be giving hints about how you can maximize your chances of success. And then finally, as important as submitting and actually publishing your paper, it's very important nowadays how to promote the impact of your paper after publication, and I'll give you a few hints about that as well afterwards. So to start off with, as I said, an introduction to Wiley. Wiley is an international company. As you can see, we've got offices right across the world. Our headquarters are here in Hoboken. Small, which I'll be talking about, is published in a little town called Weinheim in Germany. But we are based in our office here in Beijing, where I am currently broadcasting from. So Wiley as a company was founded more than 200 years ago in New York. It's a very big company. We employ about 5,600 staff members worldwide. As I mentioned, our headquarters are in Hoboken, and Wiley VCH, which is the subsidiary company that publishes Small, has been based in Germany and has been part of Wiley since 1996. And Wiley Online Library, so this is our online platform where all our journals and books can be found, can boast over 130 million users, but we also are the publishing partners for 800 societies. So we do have that extra breadth and penetration into the market. Wiley is very famous for quality products, and as you can see, we publish in all fields across a very broad spectrum. So physical sciences, health sciences, social sciences and humanities, and life sciences. Of course, the small and the journals that I mostly will be speaking about are based in our physical sciences and engineering portfolio. To give you an idea of the journal Small, which I am the editor-in-chief of, as you can see, we basically are publish interdisciplinary research on the micro and nanoscale lengths, so we differ from other material science journals in that we really focus on the miniaturization aspects of materials, and where the miniaturization leads to the phenomena or the results or the special interest features that are being observed. Small has a very broad readership. and we cater to readers in material science, in biology, in medical science, physics, chemistry, engineers. So it's very important when submitting to a journal like Small that you bear in mind that your work needs to be of particular interest to a broad range of readers. Another important take-home message here, something that you should really look up about a journal when submitting. Small has quite a high impact factor, and because of that, the competition is quite stiff to publish in Small. So our rejection rate is over 85% at the moment, and we deal with over 3,000 submissions every year. So the competition is tough. You need to make your work stand out, and hopefully I can give you a few hints about how you can go about doing that. Our other related journals, so Small, of course, is not published on its own. We published as a group of other high-impact material science journals, so the sister journals, Advanced Materials and Advanced Functional Materials, but we also have a broad range of material science journals across all fields, from polymers, biomedical research, very big range of other polymer journals as well, physics, engineering, so a very broad range of topics in material science. And as the subject develops, we also bring out new journals to meet the trends in scientific and research patterns. And right now, hot topics in research include energy materials. So advanced energy materials is aimed at the energy field. Advanced healthcare materials, focusing on the application of materials in the healthcare and biotechnology sector, and advanced optical materials based on or focusing on optics, lasers, the IT industry as one of its focuses. And our latest journal to be brought into the fold, Particle and Particle Systems Characterization. As the name implies, we talk about particles and characterization of particle systems, and this journal also has a very strong focus on nanotechnology and nanoscience. Behind any strong product is a strong team. These are the people that I have the pleasure of working with on a day-to-day basis. This is the team based in Germany and my team here in Beijing. As you can see, it's a very, it is quite a big team, and all these people are PhD chemists with postdoctoral experience in physics, in material science, in chemistry, in other scientific fields. So these are all people that are love science. They don't necessarily want to work in the lab anymore, and therefore this provides a excellent career opportunity where we get to see breakthroughs in science, we get to discuss about science, but we don't actually work in the lab and carry out research projects ourselves anymore. In the next section, this is where I'll be spending most of the time. I'll be talking about hints for your strategy. So how you can go about choosing the right journal. It's not just a case of submitting a paper to any journal or to the journal of the high impact factor. There are certain considerations that you should take into account when choosing a journal to which to submit your paper. I'll give you some ideas of the review process for Small, which is applicable to most journals out there. And this way you can also have a bit of insight into how I, as an editor, and other editors of other journals, and also referees, how they think when they're evaluating your manuscript. And hopefully this will then give you some ideas about how you can increase your chances for acceptance in a good journal. So I'll start off with the role of scientific journals. And when I ask people about why they want to publish papers, you get all sorts of answers depending on who it is you ask. So if you ask a student, they'll tell you, oh, it's because the professor wants a paper and they want to graduate with a PhD, so that's why they want to publish. And if you ask sort of career people, professors, young professors, even older professors, why they publish, well, they'll tell you it's because they need funding, it's because they need the papers for tenure, they need to apply for grants, they need the papers for promotions. But I think what we need to do is take a step back and think, why is it that we are publishing? Why do we want to publish papers? Yes, these factors that I've mentioned are reasons why you publish, but we've lost track of the real reasons why we publish. And so I'll go through the role of scientific journals and how historically they were geared towards fulfilling the need for publications. So journals traditionally fulfill four critical functions. The first, registration. So you want to say, I invented this reaction, I developed this technique, I've found some brand new product that no one's ever discovered before, so I want to let the world know what I've done. So essentially we're talking about recording author precedence and merit. An important part that journals then play in this process is to ensure quality control and improvement of the manuscripts. And this we achieve through peer review. So peer review is a very important part of scientific publication. This is where we have experts evaluate your manuscript, and they then check that what you're claiming is actually valid, that the points you're trying to bring across are substantiated by the experiments you've carried out, that you've interpreted the results correctly. And very often they also give you feedback, they give you suggestions for improvement. So the whole purpose of peer review is actually not just quality control, but also to help you improve your manuscript and the paper that you then present to the audience. Because at the end of the day, what we really want to achieve with publication is dissemination. You want to share your results and your methods with the rest of the scientific community. So you don't just want to your efforts to be restricted to your laboratory and to your group. You want the community to be able to share your results, to know what it is you've done, and to apply your work and your techniques in their own work. And then finally, very important role of journals and publishers is the archiving. So we want to ensure that we are maintaining the records of publication. Your work that you publish today has got to be available and accessible to the public, not only this year, but in 2 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 100 years' time, if need be. Even today, people still submit papers and the referees will point out, oh, well, this is good work, but it was discovered 20 years ago and the authors have simply not found the paper. This could be because they haven't really done it carefully enough literature search, or simply because the records haven't been archived very well and aren't readily accessible. So it's very important that publishers and scientific journals maintain a permanent record of publication. And this is something that scientific journals in the current system are very good at. However, other systems of publications do not necessarily offer all these functions. And here we're talking about open archives and repositories and open access journals, but that's not the point of this presentation, and I won't go into that in any depth. But what is very important for journals in today's day and age is to increase the discoverability of your paper. So once your paper has been published, you want it to be discovered. There are so many papers being published out there today. And the question is, how do you ensure that your paper is the one that's being read and not one of other thousands? In other words, we want to improve the signal to noise ratio of your paper. And I'll give you some hints at the end about techniques that are used to increase the discoverability of papers in today's age. So, as I've been stressing, a very important part of publishing is actually selecting the right journal. And there are certain factors that you should take into account when selecting a journal that you want to publish your paper in. So, most importantly, the subject focus of the journal. It's important that you are reaching the right readership. So there's no point in publishing a chemistry paper in a physics journal or a biology paper in a chemistry journal, because you won't be reaching the correct audience. So very important that your paper falls within the subject focus of the journal, and that the type of paper that you've written, so the article format, whether it's a review or a communication or a full paper, is actually published in that journal. So you want to make sure that the journal you submit your paper to covers the subject that you are reporting on, that the type of paper that you've prepared does actually feature in the journal, and that you're reaching the correct readership. The reputation of the journal is, of course, very important, and this is something that you get to know through personal experience, but also knowing the community and knowing which journals the community reads and which journals enjoy a high reputation in your particular research community. The processing speed, of course, is very important. You want to get your work out there as quickly as possible, but the peer review process is also a very important aspect of selecting the right journal. You want to know that your work is being treated fairly, that it's undergoing a rigorous peer review, so that all the papers that are published in the journal are known by the scientific community to have gone through a rigorous peer review, and above all, a fair peer review that treats all papers equally. Most of these things you learn, as I said, from personal experience. Other factors that are less important but also play a role in your decision: publication costs, and I have specifically left the impact factor as the very last thing that you should be considering as a factor where to publish your paper. Unfortunately, the reality is that most people put the impact factor right above and they play the impact factor game. I could spend hours going on about the evils of the impact factor, but this is not the place for that, so I'll move on to the next topic. So, what is it that editors are looking for when they are evaluating a manuscript? So this is just a very general thought process for editors of any journal. And what an editor does when he first receives a paper is just do a quick initial check, just to make sure that the paper fits within the scope, that the length of the paper is correct, that it's been formatted correctly, and that the authors have actually taken the time to consult previous copies of the journal and look at the author guidelines to see that the paper fits within the journal. But then what they are looking for, novelty. So we don't want to publish work that's already been published or that's incremental. We want to make sure that the work is indeed novel, and this we do by comparing to previous work, whether it's your own work or work by other people in the community. We also then want to know that your work is important to researchers in the field. That's very important because you want to get your message across to other members of your community, and they want to know, or when they're reading a journal, they want to know that all the papers they are reading are important to them. But what's more important for any journal at the moment is that it's important to the whole readership. This is especially true for multidisciplinary journals such as Small, where, as I mentioned, we don't only have people in chemistry or physics or biology or medical science. We really have a wide range of readers, and this is one of the most important hurdles that you need to get across when your paper is being evaluated by the editor. Because at the end of the day, publishing space is very limited. Journals have got very strict page budgets and constraints that they have to publish within. So we have to choose the papers very carefully before we can select them for publication. Something that we also try and pick out at this stage and evaluate very carefully are cases of ethical misconduct. So it's very important that you take these into consideration, because this is a type of behavior that should not be tolerated in any journal in today's day and age. So things like, well, falsifying data and fabricating data, which are, obviously unethical practices. What's becoming more and more common these days, unfortunately, is plagiarism, where people simply copy whole sections of text from other people's work or even from their own work. Your paper is novel. It should not be copied, or no section should be copied from any other journals. Your paper should only be submitted to one journal at a time. And this is something that's also we really trying to cut back on. Images should not be manipulated, especially, well, not to bring out certain aspects that you're trying to do. The images should be as they appeared or were produced originally. Author misrepresentation, so leaving out authors, people that have contributed significantly to the work, or even including authors that have had absolutely no role in the process. And fragmented publication. We're not after publishing as many papers as possible. We really want complete stories. This is, unfortunately, in today's day and age, there's a huge pressure on authors to publish as many papers as possible, and this leads to fragmented publication. So things that you as an author need to avoid, and we as editors are looking for at early stages as well. But of course, we also ask our referees to look out for cases of ethical misconduct. So where does the editor or a referee look? So I, as an editor, the first thing I do when evaluating a manuscript is look at the cover letter. And this is where authors tend to fall very short. They've spent loads of time preparing the manuscript, and then they just submit the manuscript and say, here's my paper, please consider it for publication. Thanks, me. You are missing a very important opportunity here, because a cover letter is essentially your advertising space. And this is one of those places where you can spend just a little bit of time to try and convince the editor about what it is that's important in your paper. I, as an editor of a multidisciplinary journal, I am not an expert in every field that the journal covers, and when I read a paper that's not necessarily in my background or something that I'm familiar with, I might not see immediately what is important about the paper, and this is where your cover letter is very useful in bringing your message across. So in your cover letter, you should mention things like why the topic is important, why these results are significant, and what are the key results? Why is this important to the research, well, to members in your community, but to the general readership? How is this different from work that has been published in the past? Why should it appear specifically in this journal and not another journal? And what is it about the paper that will attract readers? And a cover letter is also a good point to suggest referees. At the same time, the cover letter shouldn't be too long. After all, it shouldn't contain too much or any technical information for that matter. And you basically just want to bring your main points across in a succinct cover letter. When you're writing the cover letter, there are certain ethical obligations. This is your opportunity to disclose any conflicts of interest, whether positive or negative. So this means competitors that are working on the same area as you, members of your institute or collaborators, and these are people that we will then avoid using as referees. If you tell us that there are certain people that you have a personal difference of opinion with, or you don't get on with, or whatever the case may be, please do let us know, within reason, of course, and we generally honor these requests and we don't use these people as referees. What's very important at this stage as well is to list any related papers that are currently in press or that you have submitted to other journals. And this is where I stress it's not you as the author that decides whether a paper is sufficiently different or not. This is the editor's decision. So always let the editor know about other papers that are under press, in press or under consideration that may not be in open domain yet, because if this is discovered later, this could lead to an ethical investigation and, of course, embarrassment not only to the journal but especially to the authors. So let me focus a little bit about where else the editor and also referees will look when they're evaluating a manuscript. So as I mentioned, I as the editor will first look at your cover letter. This we don't pass on to referees, but then when we start evaluating the rest of the manuscript, this is also the type of evaluation that the referees are doing for your paper. So the first thing that I, as an editor, look at is, oddly enough, the conclusions. So this is perhaps an idiosyncrasy on my part, although I've heard a lot of other editors do this as well. When I'm reading a book, the first thing I do is I go to the end. I want to know what happens at the end of the book. And this is exactly the same thing for a paper, a journal paper. I go right to the end, I read your conclusions because I want to know what it is that you're aiming at, where it is that you're going, why you've done certain experiments, why your discussions are ended or targeted at a particular end. And this I can glean from the conclusion. Once I've looked at the conclusion, then I start looking at other aspects of the paper. The keywords are very important for me as an editor. It gives me an idea of what you think of the critical aspect and the critical points of your paper. But in today's day and age of computer and search engines, and especially for abstracting and indexing services, these are what they use to abstract and to index your paper. So very important that you choose your keywords and your topics very carefully. What I then look at are the literature references, and this is where you as an author need to pay careful attention to make sure that you have a comprehensive and broad literature or a list of references. So firstly, you need to ensure that you have the correct breadth. So you don't only, and this is what I stress to all my authors, this is not your opportunity to boost your citation index. This is where you want to place your work in context. And it's very important that you list groups that have played or that have made important contributions to the field. You want to put this in your work in context of what other people have done. Of course, it's important that you also cite your own work, especially where it is relevant, but you don't only want to cite your own papers, because if you only cite your papers, to me it tells me that nobody else is working in this field, and therefore no one's going to be interested in this paper. So avoid using only your references in the citations. Just a hint, very often a referee will be someone that's in one of these citations, and if you happen to miss a citation that the referee thinks is important, and that his work is not being given due respect, he's probably not going to be very happy. So it's in your best interest to give as broad a range and as broad a comprehensive distribution of other groups working in the field. Of course, you also need to have the correct depth of literature citations, so you want to put this in the correct historical context. So what was the first paper in the field, or how did this develop, what are the most recent developments in the field, and how is this paper contributing to the field in the recent context. And of course, the literature, the citation list should be up to date. So if your literature citation stopped 2 years ago, it either tells me that your paper's been sitting in a drawer or in a student's computer, and you've just submitted it without actually updating the list, or it tells me that this has got a very long history, it's been submitted to various papers, and again, that you haven't updated the citations when you revise and submit your manuscript. So very important that you spend some time putting your literature references together. The abstract is very important for me. When I'm reading it, it gives me a good idea and a good overview of your paper. So it does bring all the salient points of the paper together and gives a good overview of the manuscript. But also, again, going back to search engines and abstracting and indexing services, they very often use the abstract to index your manuscript. So very important that you spend some time and you prepare a carefully drafted abstract. And finally, I look at the visual information. So by this, I mean the way your manuscript is presented. Have you actually taken the effort to ensure that your paper has been prepared according to the author guidelines that the journal has set out for you? Is the paper easy to read? Can it be followed? Is it a strain on the eyes when you're looking at pictures? You want to make sure that you have a sufficient balance between text and graphical information. So you want to have enough pictures to balance text. There's also an English saying that a picture paints 1,000 words. So very important sometimes that instead of spending pages and pages trying to explain a concept, it can be represented and succinctly summarized in a nice figure or graph. So make sure that you prepare these with great care. At the same time, a graph should not contain too much information. So something like this can just be an overload on the reader's eye. You don't want to put too much information on a single picture. Very often you have to realize that the picture is quite small. It's only a small part on the screen, and if you put too much information on it, it won't be clearly visible and legible to, well, the referee, but also to the reader in the end. And just try and be a bit neat and professional about the way you present your paper. So use the same fonts throughout. There's nothing more annoying and more distracting when you have 4 or 5 different fonts and different text sizes in the same picture. So take a little bit of care to ensure that your paper looks good, because we're all human, and if it's a pleasure to look and to have a pleasant view of the paper, it's also going to be easier and give us a good impression that you've actually taken some time to prepare the paper carefully. So at this point, my thoughts are, if I'm interested in your paper, my readers will be as well. And at this point, I need to look for an expert and a referee who will then evaluate the contents of your paper. So what is it that we and the referees are looking for? And now what I'm going to do is go over the requirements for small, but this, of course, is true for any good journal in nanotechnology or chemistry, material science, whatever the case may be. So if we're talking about the synthesis or fabrication of a material, is it a new material? Is it a new system? We are looking for things that are distinct advances on previous publications. In other words, not a simple variant on a previous method or something that's already been published before. We look at the characterization. We need to make sure that you've done all the correct experiments, that everything you say and claim in your paper is backed up by solid experimental evidence. So this is something that you either need to include in your paper or in the supporting information, and must be readily available to the editor, the referee, and to readers in future. Also, when you're looking at papers, I want to make sure that the work that you're presenting, or the material or cell line or whatever it is that you are publishing, displays new properties and abilities, and it must be superior and better than things that have been published in the past. The more prestigious a journal, the more competitive a journal, the stricter the editors and the referees are on any of these aspects. For top journals, gone are the days where a simple synthesis or a new phenomenon is good enough. There must be some use, there must be a purpose to what is being studied and reported. And best is when you can give us concrete proof, or at least a potential demonstration that this work does have a valid application and can be used in a sort of a day-to-day activities. And finally, what we're looking for, and I expect my referees to back me up, is that the paper appeals to a broad readership. So not only to members of your community, but to a broad scope of readers, as it's important for any multidisciplinary journal. How is it that I go about selecting referees? We've got a database with over 20,000 active reviewers that we can search by keyword and publication history, or even reviewing history. But as I mentioned before, suggestions from the authors are very helpful. This is something that you can do in your cover letter, or in some submission systems they actually have a place where you can suggest referees. These are very helpful to us, but don't only suggest the biggest names. Yes, people like Professor Whitesides and Professor Robert Langer and Professor Lei Zhang, yes, these are all great guys. They're excellent reviewers, but they're very busy. They don't necessarily have time to do routine refereeing, and what we're looking for are people that are on top of the game, that actually spend a lot of time keeping up with the literature and have time to dedicate to reviewing manuscripts. When reviewers don't have time, they very often suggest colleagues or other members in the department that can provide a review, and these suggestions are very helpful to us. Our advisory board members are very helpful to us. We tend not to use them in routine refereeing, but in more difficult cases such as appeals or disputes where we have ethical situations, or referee reports that are contradictory in nature. So this is when we would use our advisory board members. And finally, the editor's own knowledge of the community. This is why we attend conferences and visit institutes, so that we can get to know the community, and in this way increase our own knowledge and pool of referees. So the type of things that we ask our reviewers to look for: I mentioned these things all at some point. So the motivation of the study must be clear, and it must be important and have a specific aim or useful application. Novelty and originality is very important, but it's also equally important that the conclusions and what you're stating is supported by substantial experimental evidence. Any ethical issues need to be addressed, and the paper must be above board when, in all cases, ethical, and any flaws or mistakes should be pointed out in the referee report, things that can be added or removed, and clarity of the paper. So your referees and the editor are your first point of contact. They are your first readers, so they should provide feedback to you about how you can improve your paper. And once you receive these comments from the referee, then you need to go about taking them into consideration and preparing a revised manuscript. So when you're revising your manuscript, these comments should be carefully considered and reviewed. Not all changes are necessarily important or have to be made, but you do need convincing arguments. So we don't have enough material, our machine is broken, those aren't good enough arguments anymore. This is where you can collaborate or hire an external service, whatever the case may be. A convincing argument must be a scientific counter or answer to the scientific point that the referee has made. So when preparing the revision, the manuscript, it's very helpful to the editor, but also to the reviewers if they are reviewing the paper again, that you highlight the changes in the manuscript, and in your cover letter include a point-by-point response to all the issues that the reviewer has raised. This is very important, and this really speeds up a second round of reviewing should your paper be sent back to the referees. It's important that you don't take comments made by the referees personally, and it's also very important that you don't attack the referees or basically make nasty or unprofessional comments towards the referees, because the responses are sent back to the reviewers. And it's very important that they see that you have actually taken their effort into consideration, because you need to convince the editor and the reviewers that the changes you have made are sufficient to allow publication in the journal. Should your paper be rejected, can you appeal? Well, the answer is usually no. For the simple reason that the risk of prolonging the publication time is great. You can lead to protracted publication times, which is of no benefit to you or to the scientific community. And at the end of the day, good papers will be noticed and found no matter where they're published. Also, the editors and the referees know the journal well, and the criticisms tend to be valid, and of course, the author is very often not in a position to be objective about these things. But occasionally, it is prudent and advisable to appeal. I would say that about 10 to 20% of our appeals are successful. So in rare cases, when you think that the editor or the referees have really missed the impact or the novelty of your work, you can try and bring that out. But most importantly, when it's just a matter of opinion, we're really not interested. But if there are factual errors in what the referee and the editors have told you, and these errors have led to rejection of your paper, then you do have a basis for an appeal. So in the final part of this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about publishing in the online age. So in today's day and age, it's not only important, as I said, about submitting your paper or having the paper published. It's how you promote your paper once it has been published. There are thousands of papers out there, so it's up to you and us, the publishers, to try and ensure that your paper is read and accepted by as many people as possible. So first, and this is definitely your responsibility, you want to carry out your revisions as quickly as possible so that we can publish your paper as quickly as possible, and to avoid publication or to avoid your work being scooped by someone else in a different journal. But once your paper is printed and published, then how can you ensure that it's being accepted and being read by the community? And there are hints that or tricks that we use, some of them older than and some of them modern. So traditionally, press releases are very useful, especially when your paper is of general interest to the common or to the to the population or general population, not just the scientific readers. And we, the publishers, we tend to work very closely with press officers of most universities to ensure that the press releases are distributed as widely as possible. Reprints, in the old days, people used to have or order reprints from the publishers. You'd have, well, 100 or 200 copies of your paper, and you would give them and post them to your best friends and people who are working in the field, just so that your work would be promoted and advertised. And cover posters, if your work is chosen as a cover for a journal, it is good to order a poster, print a large poster, put it up in your office, put it up in your departmental notice board. This is one way that your paper will get noticed and read. What I'll spend a little bit of time doing in the next few slides is highlighting a few new services that are available. And so I won't discuss this now. I'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. But also social media is increasingly important. So Twitter in China, Weibo, Rinrin, the rest of the world has said Twitter, Facebook. This is a new age. This is how the younger generation disseminates information and absorbs the information. So this is one way of promoting your papers, something that we do to a certain extent, but we also rely on our authors to do so. So as I said, there are several online news services and portals that provide a news service, and I'll firstly discuss the Wiley service. It's called materialsviews.com. So what we do is we bring together the top articles from as many journals in our entire portfolio as possible. And by doing this, we are reaching a larger readership than just that of the journal alone. We don't publish technically detailed articles. What we do are these are highlight articles or news type articles, just very brief summaries of paper. The idea is we want to attract the interest of someone who may not necessarily be an expert in the field, or you want to attract students, or you want to attract people that are looking for ideas where they can apply their own research. So by presenting these news type articles, we bring together a broader range of readers that are not necessarily interested in your work on a day-to-day basis, but they could be interested in certain aspects of your work. And if they are, then they will access the paper and read it in greater detail. So this is one way of driving and increasing the usage and citation of your paper. So these type of services then don't only provide articles and scientific papers, but they have other products and information that is useful for the society. So things like job openings, conferences, events, news products, news articles. And by doing this, as I said, we ensure that you bring together as many interested people as are possible for the field. For Materials Use China, we have a Chinese language option, and this is materialsuschina.com. So this is not only, or in fact, it's not a translation of materialsviews.com. It's got a very strong Chinese and Asian character, and it does translate some of the important articles from materialsviews.com, but it does have its own content that is of more of greater focus to the Chinese community. So if you are not aware of the site, I really encourage you to visit and have a look at the site. The Wiley ones, so materialsviewschina.com are Wiley products, but of course this type of service is also provided by other publishers and other organizations, and these are useful tools and services for the nanotechnology community. So things like the ACS Nanotation, which is provided by the American Chemical Society, and NanoWork, which is an independent news service bringing together lots of details, lots of information, and more industrial-related information on nanotechnology and nanotechnology publications. So all these are very useful sources of information for authors. So coming to the end, just to conclude, what I'd like to stress, hopefully I've given you a few tips on how you can improve your manuscript, but why it is that you should be publishing. And at the end of the day, unpublished work is lost. But at the same time, the output in science, the output in research, especially in material science, in nanotechnology, is increasing tremendously. And this is putting a tremendous strain not only on journal space, but also on reviewer loads, which means it's even more important that you make your work stand out so that it can be, it can draw the attention of the referees, it can be included in top journals. At the same time, just remember, if you aren't accepted in a top journal, that's not the end of the world. It might just mean that your article is important, simply just doesn't have the scope for a broad readership. And we encourage you then to submit to other Wiley or other journals that also focus on your area, but attract a more specialized audience. Access to published work is huge. The internet age has made information available at a mouse click, and it's really easy to get information these days. So it's important that you make your work stand out so that it's accessed over and above the other papers. Peer review isn't perfect, but it's the best system we have at the moment, and it certainly helps to ensure the quality of the papers that we produce. And of course, as I've been saying along, the competition is tough. It's important that you make your work stand out, because at the end of the day, editors, referees, readers, we all want the same thing. We want high quality articles. So to finish off, just some useful resources. As I mentioned, Wiley Online Library is our online platform where you can find all our journals and online products. So the slide is self-explanatory, but there are other resources that you can find on Wiley Online Library and these other sites. So George Whitesides about 10 years ago wrote a paper in Advanced Materials about writing a scientific paper. This is an excellent paper. It was good 10 years ago. It's still valid today. Really good read. WileyChina.com has lots of author resources about how you can prepare your papers and what to concentrate on. And our author services website also has other tools that you can use, and these books on, well, these are Wiley books, but of course there are thousands of books out there about writing papers, how to prepare a good paper, not only from a grammatical point of view, but also how to structure a paper. I encourage you to read as much as possible, because it's only through practice and it's through reading things like this that you become a better writer. And to end, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listening to me, and I am open to any questions.